All right, welcome back to Open. The ability to browse the web is a modern day necessity, and yet millions of Americans struggle to gain access to high speed internet, not to mention in the borough of the Bronx. Organization Consumer Reports is currently supporting a public service and advocacy campaign called The Fight for Fair Internet, and they explore the challenges people face with their internet service providers. Please welcome Senior Policy Counsel for Privacy Technology Policy at Consumer Reports. It is Jonathan Schwantes. Mr. Schwantes, nice to have you with us.
Yes, good morning, Gary. Thank you for having me.
So why the struggle? It seems to be something that is really a necessity. You and I just were talking about you got to have your cell phone and be able to even get into the ballpark, and it's really a necessity. Many people are at the lower end of the economic spectrum, and they don't have that opportunity. Why can't we get everybody kind of on the same page for something we all need?
That's a great question, Gary, and thank you again for having me. I will start by saying we've known this for a long time. Consumer Reports, how important broadband has become to really function in 21st century American life. Everything from working from home, which became keenly aware of that at the start of the pandemic, almost 3 years ago now, but also students also learning from home, a telehealth appointment. You no longer have to go to the hospital. You can see your doctor online. So having a broadband, which is basically shorthand for a high-speed internet connection, has been absolutely essential to functioning. We see it as a public utility. But why is it so difficult? Well, we used to think of it as, do you physically have the connection in your home? Is your home wired for broadband internet service? We've known that, and that's still a challenge. It's certainly a challenge really in rural areas, but also in urban areas as well. But with the pandemic, we also discovered it became an affordability issue. Your home or your apartment may be wired for broadband, but if you can't afford it, you're not going to buy it. And so a lot of the work that we've done in Washington, D.C. and elsewhere is to make sure broadband, basically high-speed internet service, is more affordable so all Americans can get online, because it's not just a luxury anymore, it's a necessity.
It sounds like, in a way, it's a classic confrontation between, the little guy and the big guy, because the large internet providers, and I don't want to list them and call anybody out, but, they compete, but they compete at really a high level. You'd think competition would knock the prices down, but they've all got a gimmick. So they tell you they'll sell it to you cheap for a year or free for 2 months. And then all of a sudden, you're back into the same problem. I'm guessing that this is where the fight for a fair internet campaign comes in. Talk about the campaign, who's involved in it, and what the objectives are to get us to a point where we can all afford it.
Great. I mean, my first reaction is I wish there was more competition. There is just not enough competition for like a wired connection in your home. Some would say, yeah, your smartphone can do it, but I challenge folks to really work from home entirely based on just from your smartphone. So the first answer is there's not enough competition, because we found that where there is, prices tend to be lower. But the whole goal of our campaign was to find out what Americans are paying for broadband service. And the way we wanted to do that is not by scraping their websites for their advertised rates, because you're absolutely right, Gary. It can get very confusing when you look at, oh, that's a great discount for a year. But is that the true price Americans are paying month in, month out? So we ask consumers, share your bill with us. We'll take a look at it across all internet service providers from across the country to get a general sense of what are Americans paying for broadband. And then the second question is, what are the factors that influence price? So if we can find out what leads to lower prices, maybe policymakers in Washington and state capitals can intervene to make sure Americans are paying less for broadband.
So you folks at Consumer Reports collected, as we understand, 22,000 consumer high-speed internet service bills. What did you learn about what people are paying, who's not paying, who's able to pay and not able to pay?
What we learned is $75 in general across all of these tens of thousands of bills, regardless of your speed plan. And we can get into that if you like. But in general, $75 is sort of the middle of the pack. So if you're paying below that, congratulations. If you're paying more than that, give us a call and see what we can do to get you a better rate. But I mean, That's generally what we found. We found all other sorts of things related to who's getting discounts and who's not. What are these junk fees that appear on some bills? Why is that? Why are you paying an internet infrastructure surcharge? That sounds like something maybe the ISP, which is shorthand for Internet Service Provider, maybe that's some kind of government fee they're required to pay. Not true. It's a made-up fee by an internet service provider that they're passing on to consumers just to pad their bottom line.
The city of New York put out these kiosks, and very useful, very helpful for some people. But that becomes a government expenditure. Either that, or they've got to find a way to amortize it through companies, et cetera, et cetera. Talk a little bit. You mentioned the whole notion of urban America versus rural America. Is this a government thing that maybe government should step in and say, you know what, we're going to figure out how to fund these things or coordinate the contracts? Or is it really a thing that we've got to figure out how to get the private industries to figure out how to do this? Because after all, they're the ones making the money on it. Let's be honest.
Well, yeah, and Gary, I'm a lawyer, so I'll give you a lawyer's answer.
Good.
It's a little bit of as part of the infrastructure law. I was going to say last year, but now actually since we're in 2023, passed in November of 2021, there is $40-some billion that's going to roll out to the states, hopefully this year, to expand broadband access and affordability in this country. And some of that will go to urban areas. But it is a tough nut to crack, because you're right, on the private side, these big ISPs are only going to go into areas that they think that people are going to pay for broadband, and they'll be profitable. So that leaves out our urban areas that don't have competition, or from what we found from our study, still sort of old DSL, which is really slow internet service, but they're paying just as much as if it was broadband. So that's a huge problem. And I would say a large problem in the urban areas that we found is a lot of infrastructure not being upgraded to broadband in a way that Americans would consider internet they can use. So yes, part of it is the government intervening, put more money to expand broadband access. But it doesn't solve the affordability problem in terms of, well, can we just have the government fund competitors? That's not always a good idea if there's already an existing provider. So something that we looked at in our study is, well, if we have a consumer that I call the stuck consumer, so there's no competition, they're stuck with one provider, but there's a general feeling they're paying way too much for subpar service, that's where I think policymakers need to really do some hard thinking about, are those consumers getting ripped off? Is there price gouging taking place? And what should the government do?
There is an education piece in here. There's no question about it, because and frankly, I'm not all that technically oriented. I see an ad and they say, oh, you can get this speed or that speed. And I'm like, well, I don't know. It kind of downloads okay. I mean, I don't know. Am I getting cheated? And then I go into the Apple store and it's like zip and everything is there all of a sudden. And you're like, wait a minute. How do people know if they're getting a good deal or not getting a good deal on their internet speed and what they need for their own particular, services that they need, et cetera?
Absolutely. That's a fantastic question. We have a tool at Consumer Reports called How Much Speed Do You Need? And you just walk through your household of all the devices that are connected to the internet. It's not like when I was growing up, there was no internet. But now you got to count it. It's your TV, it's probably a couple smartphones, probably a couple computers, maybe your fridge, maybe your home security system. All of these things need bandwidth. So our tool at Consumer Reports helps folks understand how much speed do you need. Make sure you have enough, so you have enough speed. But there's also a second part to it. Some consumers are paying too much for internet because they're actually buying more bandwidth than they could possibly use. Take a gigabyte. I know we're not going to get into the technical details, but that's basically a lot of internet, 1,000 megabits per second download speed. For a lot of consumers, that's just too much. You don't need that much internet speed, and you're probably paying more for more service than you possibly need. So we encourage people to use the tool, think about it, and then also look at your bill and try to compare. Like, when's the last time you called your internet service provider and ask them if maybe they can give you a better package that is cheaper?
I guess I'm going to, in part, answer the previous question by telling our viewers that in your article, you go into detail about an interactive feature where readers can get a few stats about their ISPs. According to that, Verizon was the most expensive, reaching $216 a month for the internet. That sounds like a lot of money to me. What would readers be surprised about if they were to go through this and to learn about their ISPs and what they're getting or maybe not getting?
Yeah, with specific to Verizon, that's their price, and that's some of their high speed, their best packages, their gigabyte plans. But that's before the discount. So they'd be surprised to learn that there's actually very few Verizon consumers paying that $2 or whatever it was because it's so heavily discounted. And that's part of the confusion here. Now, it's all great. We're all for a sale price. We're all for a discount. But if it kind of blurs the real price of internet, and so it's sort of like everything's always on sale in that case, and it's confusing. And so for that, you might be surprised to learn that you could be paying a very different price than your neighbor for the exact same plan. And so that's where it's like enough of the shenanigans. Just make the price be the price. Get rid of these silly junk fees. The discounts are great, but there should be some, they should be available to everybody and not just new customers.
Yeah, and that's where potentially legislation could come in and say, look, set your price. That's what it is. As an aside, I'll say the airlines need to do something like that as well, but that's another dialogue entirely. So bottom line here, we just got about a minute. What are the next steps to ensure that people across the country have access to reliable and affordable internet? Let's sum it up.
Yeah, we have to make sure that, it's great that the federal government has huge investment in broadband access and affordability, but we need to make sure it's going to places where it's going to have the most impact. It's great that, the pandemic was horrible, but now we have a lot more money for broadband, including programs that help low-income Americans afford broadband. The Affordable Connectivity Program comes to mind. So for folks to check that out to see if you can $30 each month, that's a good thing. But they have to keep going. It would be great if we had more competition in both urban and rural areas. And so it's a struggle, but we have to make sure, I hope, in the next 5 to 10 years that all this money that's being spent actually does some good.
Jonathan Schwantes, Senior Policy Counsel for Privacy and Technology Policy at Consumer Reports. Thank you so much for joining us. Stuff we all need to know, and you brought it to us. We really appreciate it. Folks, to keep in touch with all the work Consumer Reports does, please go to their website at consumerreports.org or follow them across all platforms at Consumer Reports. So we have come to the end of our show today. I want to thank all the guests for joining us, and thank you, of course, our Bronx viewers for tuning in. If you missed any part of today's show, you can catch the re-cablecast at 5 and 10 p.m. on Optimum Channel 67, Verizon Fios 33, or watch anytime on the web at bronxnet.org. I'm Gary Axelbank, filling in for Kim and Aline, who will be back next week. We're wishing you and yours a safety and well and a happy new year now and, of course, always. We'll see you next time. Good night.